Hey, welcome back. We're talking about breakthrough. I hope you're not missing a single day of these devotionals. I hope you're really giving your heart to God. This 60-day journey really has the power to change your life if you will lean into it one day at a time and really give God your heart. We've started with the study of David versus Goliath, a dangerously familiar story, but we've learned some new things. We've learned that we've got to declare God's victory with our words and specifically declare Bible promises about your situation. Read them out loud every day. Put them in your car. When you're stopped at a traffic light, you declare those promises. We've learned that we have to take the first step. David ran toward Goliath. And so we're not going to see God's breakthrough power in our circumstances before we step out in faith. We're going to see it when we step out in faith. Now, why did God choose David? There were a lot of Israelites at this time. He picked one. Why did he pick David? Well, God actually tells us the answer to that question in the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 22. It says this, God said, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. So let's pause there. Why did God choose David? Because David was a man after God's own heart. You can be a person after God's own heart, a woman after God's own heart, or a man after God's own heart. This can be true of you. Think about it. God said to everyone in heaven, look at this guy down here on earth. He is after my own heart. How can you have that be true of you? Does it mean that you have to wake up every day and you're just smiling and you're like, I love God every day, I never have a bad day? Does it mean that you never sin and you never stumble and you never struggle? Well, we know from David's life that that's not the case. David sinned. In fact, he sinned pretty big. You read Psalm chapter 51, and it's all him repenting from having had an affair, killed a guy, right? He definitely sinned. But the direction of David's life is that whenever he sinned, he always got back up and went toward God. So being a person after God's own heart does not mean you have a life of perfection. It means you have a life of Godward direction. What's the direction of your life? Here we are about a week into this study, and the fact that you're clicking on this every day and you're opening your heart to God, it tells me you are a person after God's own heart. You can pray for God to cultivate that in you. When God said David's a person after my own heart, it wasn't about David's emotions. We know from reading the Psalms that David had a lot of down days that we would call in modern terms depression, deep discouragement, and yet he was a man after God's own heart. I hope that encourages you. You can be a person after God's own heart, even if you feel down, even if you feel discouraged, even if you're going through depression. So if being a person after God's own heart isn't about perfection, and it's not about our emotional state, then what is it about? Well, it's about this thing that you have inside you called a free will. You have a lever inside you that only you can move toward God or away from God. Your free will, because you're made in the image of God. Being a person after God's own heart is being a person who chooses, no matter how you feel and no matter how imperfect you are, every day you move that lever back toward God. And whenever it gets flipped back the other way, you just move it back toward God. It's persistence, it's dedication. Now, God gives us a definition of what a person after his own heart is, and it's actually the very next sentence. Let's look back at our verse. God said, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. What does that mean? What does that look like? It looks like this. He will do everything I want him to do. Is that true of you today? Are you a person who will do everything that God wants you to do? If so, then you're a person after God's own heart. If not, then join me in moving the lever and saying, God, I'm changing my heart. I'm turning my heart toward you. I will do everything you ask me to do, God. I've pre-decided. When I get to a fork in the road and I know what your way is, doesn't matter how much I want to go the other way, I'm going to go your way. I've pre-decided. I'm a person who obeys you. I do whatever you want. That's what it looks like to be a man or woman after God's own heart. Let's live that way today. I'll see you tomorrow.